And so really what it became for me and for Cirque, and honestly, I think for us as a team at Indepreneur, is finding ways to take these really, complex, kind of arduous and often difficult balls that we all have to keep in the air and figure out, some more streamlined systems to get those things done.
You are now listening to the Creative Juice podcast, brought to you by Indepreneur.io.
What's up, Indies? Welcome back to the Creative Juice podcast. I'm your host, Jack McCarthy, and I'm really excited for today's episode. As you guys know, listening to Creative Juice, we talk a lot about what to focus on when marketing your music and marketing your music online. But you know what we don't often talk a whole lot about is how to actually focus and get done the things that you need to get done in your music marketing. So in this episode, we're going to talk more about how to get more done in your music business as an artist or as in a band. And I'm super excited to be joined by a very special guest for this episode. I'd like to introduce you all and welcome back to the podcast, Jonah McLean, aka DUX. Welcome back, Jonah. Glad to have you here. Thanks for being here, man.
Thanks, Jack. Yeah, man, I'm excited to be back again on the podcast.
Yeah, definitely pumped to have you. And the reason I wanted to bring Jonah on, besides giving everybody an opportunity to hear his beautiful voice, was Jonah heads up all of the operations at Indepreneur. In addition to being an artist in his own right and getting things constantly done in his own music career, he also keeps a lot of what we do at Indepreneur and at IndieX really working like a well-oiled machine. So what I'm hoping that we can kind of unpack in this episode is how we focus as a company on getting so much done, how we help artists at the agency get a lot done in their marketing, how we make it make sense, how we structure it, and keep things on track. And, I think kind of where I wanted to kick this episode off is to not overwhelm anybody. It's just to say up front here, like, we get it, I totally get it. Yeah. Artists are doing all the things, writing, recording, performing, doing your marketing, handling your social media. Some folks do their own booking. Yep. I know, Jonah, you just got back from a gig over the weekend where you were traveling.
Yep, exactly. Yep.
So I can understand, and we get feedback sometimes from our listeners that say like, oh man, like a lot of this is really, really great stuff that you guys are talking about, but it's kind of overwhelming to think about where I can fit it into what I do. Yep. And I want to start this episode out, I guess, by just touching on the idea of like, well, the things that we're about to chat about here and sort of unpack is like, I'm not about to sit here and tell you like that this is just about hustle and grit and, not getting any sleep.
Yeah, man. And it's so funny that you bring up the show this weekend. And I think of all the things you mentioned that we as independent artists do, a lot of times too, right? Like we're also working jobs, oftentimes like a full-time job. And so
absolutely,
I relate to this so hard, and I was super excited that you wanted me to be on the podcast. Cause I just spent the last, 4 or 5 days, not only working 8 hours a day for Indepreneur, but also being in LA, trying to get some sessions in while I was there, traveling down there, doing the show and everything that comes along with that. So yeah, man, I'm excited to crack into it. I love the topic for this episode and excited to be here.
Hell yeah, man. I'm so stoked to have you. I don't think we could have a better guest on to specifically talk about this topic because awesome. You really have your hands in, like you said, everything that you're doing with your own artistry. And I'll link back in the show notes actually to previous episodes that DUX has been on where he and Cirque actually unpacked some of the marketing work that they were doing way back in the day. It's been a while since you've been on the show.
Yeah, man. I think the last time I came on the podcast, Cirque was at the old office in downtown Orlando. I went down there to see him. And we did a whole episode talking about the DUX album launch that we did, which, was great. That was a couple years ago, I think maybe 2 or 3 years now. So it's definitely been a minute.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll like I said, I'll link to that in the show notes so y'all can listen to it and get a little bit more in Jonah's head and hear some of his music as well. But I want to kick us off. I want to kick us off and just talk a little bit about, recently, Jonah, I know you and Cirque have been working together on streamlining your projects and kind of your processes, how you're getting things done in your own artistry. And I know you've also been working with a number of indies in the Best Year Ever program that we kind of kicked off at the beginning of the year, in sort of teaching artists how they can apply some of the workflow structures that we do at Indepreneur. So I'd love to just, kind of start off with that as a jumping off point here, and just get into some of the workflow concepts that you think are important for artists to know about.
Totally. Yeah. And I think that for us as independent artists and musicians, as you already said, there's so much that we have to do. There's so much that goes into that. And so really what it became for me and for Cirque, and honestly, I think for us as a team at Indepreneur, is finding ways to take these really, complex, kind of arduous and often difficult balls that we all have to keep in the air and figure out, some more streamlined systems to get those things done. It's been really cool because through learning about that with what we do at Indepreneur, I've been able to certainly apply that to my own music. Cirque is applying it to his music. And then, like you touched on, we did this Best Year Ever thing at the beginning of the year and really shared it with a lot of the indies as well. So if you want, I can kind of crack into a little bit about what that looks like, what we do, the big reveal with Scrum and all that good stuff, to touch on.
Yeah, let's just get right into it.
Yeah, so when I started with, so I came on to work with Indepreneur over the summer. I started in around, July or so. And one of the things that really, everyone at the team was interested in trying to shore up was our workflow, was how we were getting things done day to day. And something that Cirque and I chatted a lot about, and with you, was to check out Scrum and kind of learn more about what that entails. And without getting too deep dive early in the episode and overwhelming everyone with a bunch of terminology about Scrum, really all it is it's a workflow. It's a workflow that helps you solve complex problems, where there's a lot of moving parts. As I already said, there's a lot of balls in the air. And so really there's just some really good guidelines, activities that you do week to week to really help ensure your success. It's a system that's very malleable, so it can kind of bend and break as you need it to. It's kind of designed to where if you slip up, if you miss a week, life happens, things get in the way. You still have some mechanisms by which you can deliver a lot of really good quality work and still focus on your goals and things that you're trying to achieve. For me personally, as an artist, it's been a total game changer for me because prior to using Scrum, I just often felt kind of, chicken with the head cut off, just running around. There's so much that I needed to get done as a writer and producer and musician that plays and produces a lot of the music I'm releasing. That's a whole thing in and of itself. And then obviously all the marketing and everything else that comes with releasing it and all of that. So I had several years of just really struggling with that. And for me, at least, Scrum has really provided a great system that I can follow. I've released more music and content and videos in the last 6 to 8 months than I probably did in the 2 years prior. So it's really been a game changer for me, I think for Cirque as well. And then definitely for the team at Indepreneur also. Yeah,
for sure. And I think you summed it up well in saying chicken with a head cut off. I think that's how a lot of musicians feel when it comes to getting projects done in a way that doesn't feel like they're constantly putting fires out. You think about what a traditional record release from start to finish, from the production stage to the post-mortem of a release strategy tends to look like. It can span a very, very long period of time for sure. And there's a lot of overlapping parts going from writing to recording to production to mixing to, content creation to marketing. And especially for artists with small teams, it can feel really, really overwhelming and almost, from feedback that I get from a lot of indies, it can feel impossible to get all of that done on a timetable.
Yeah. And I think honestly, it feeling daunting and borderline impossible is I think that's pretty spot on. A lot of times, like you said, you're just kind of throwing darts at the wall, hoping that something sticks. And there's usually just so many balls in the air that it can feel really difficult. I've definitely felt that myself, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to get a little bit into like a very basic definition of Scrum, without getting too into the weeds, but maybe just explaining some of the core concepts of sprints and your products and your goals. And then we can get a little bit into like deeper, examples of how artists can structure and plan their work in a system like this.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said, from a bird's eye view, Scrum is a workflow to solve complex problems. I think actually, if you look up the Scrum manual, which I think we'll touch on, I know we want to try and get some resources for indies and for listeners, but the Scrum guide.
We'll definitely link to the Scrum guide for sure.
Exactly.
As a
that's like the go-to piece of literature to check out. Really good, easy definitions, easy to digest, and it's free online. So we'll link that. But yeah, so when you look at Scrum, like I said, it's a workflow to solve complex problems. So you have all these things you need to get done, and really, when we look at Scrum, what we're talking about is products. And so for most musicians and artists, your product is going to be your music business, your artistry, trying to release music, whatever you're trying to do, perform. For us at Indepreneur, we have products like the Indepreneur agency. We have indie founder coaching, different things that for us, we might have a variety of products. And so as an artist, for me, as DUX, my music business is ultimately what my product is. And so the from kind of the top level down in Scrum, what you want to start with is setting a product goal. And so you establish a product goal, which is basically to say, hey, this is where I'm trying to get to. This is what I'm trying to do. It's going to be essentially your main focus for you and or your team, who's ever working with you on it. But your product goal is kind of the overarching, like, hey, this is where we're trying to get to. Maybe you're trying to do an album release. Maybe you're trying to, do a live show and stream it, and you have to get all this stuff that goes into that, right? It's not like you just snap your fingers and those things get done. As we've already said, there's so much that goes into that, especially if you're starting from square one. Maybe you're doing that album launch and you don't have even any music written yet. So what we're going to try and do with Scrum is take these things and say, okay, on a base level, what are we trying to get done here? We want to release an album. And then from there, you kind of know what the commitment is. You kind of know where you're trying to get to. You know what the end in mind is. And so what you start to do from there is populate what we call the product backlog. And what that is a series of tasks or processes that you need to do to get to that point. So, to oversimplify, if it was that album launch, you could almost break that down into different phases, which is maybe writing and recording, producing, mixing, mastering, right? Like all the stuff that would have to happen just for the music. Then you could start looking at, okay, what's my release strategy, marketing, promo? Am I going to do a show? All these things that go into that. And so those are kind of the next level down. As you start to populate your product backlog, you start to break those tasks down into essentially like how chunky are these tasks, right? Is this something that's going to take me 30 minutes to do, or is this something that's going to take me 3 weeks or 3 months or 3 years, right? So you start to look at this and say, okay, what are maybe the more higher level complex things? What's kind of the low hanging fruit? And you start to kind of organize and prioritize that stuff according to kind of what needs to happen. Now, I think a crucial piece to mention in this is with Scrum. Highly recommend that if anyone starts to use it, you have some sort of project management tool. We use Asana. I use Asana for the DUX stuff. We love it. It's a great program. We don't get any kind of bonus for saying that. They're just, in our opinion, it's the best task tracker that we've used. So you want to have something like that. Yeah. Yeah,
definitely a big fan of Asana. There are other tools out there. Maybe some of our listeners use something like Trello, ClickUp. There's all sorts of project management tools. Monday.com is a big one. You can sort of, pick and choose based on where you find your fit.
Yeah.
But yeah, like you were saying, Jonah, like I think that having something like that in place is invaluable. Especially if you're working with multiple people, which, many artists are. They have maybe they have a little team built up around them.
And I was, for years, I was like a to-do list kind of guy, and I was like analog. I had pen and paper. I'm writing lists all over the place. I got to do this. I got to do that. Not probably the most efficient way to do it. And for me, I just feel like Asana or Trello, whatever folks are using, it's kind of like a to-do list on steroids, right? Like you have that, but rather than having it on a piece of paper that's going to get lost or messed up, you got everything digitally. So yeah, definitely recommend, Asana, any kind of task tracker that's going to help you get through the work. But so to get back to Scrum, we have our product backlog. We're filling it with all this work that needs to get done, really not necessarily being cognizant of this point in terms of time or anything like that. We're just trying to analyze, okay, like what needs to happen. So there's a fair amount of planning that goes into this. And you mentioned this earlier, Jack, but when you work in Scrum, what you're trying to do is once you've populated this product backlog, you're going to go in there and you're going to start to identify the work that needs to get done next. Now, there's a bunch of different roles in Scrum, which I don't think we need to get into too much right now, but essentially what you're doing is you're called the product owner. And so again, for me, to use myself as an example, I am the product owner of my DUX music career. I mean, that's on me. I do have some different collaborators and people I work with, but ultimately, the buck kind of stops here. And so as product owner, it's my job to be aware of what needs to happen next for me to get to where I need to go. So again, to use the album launch example, if the first thing you need to do is write music and get that produced, mixed, mastered, you're going to want to start there. And so what we do with Scrum is we meet. You would have a meeting where you do some planning for this. It's called sprint planning, and it's where you outline your sprint. Sprint is a term from Scrum that's basically just like a time-boxed increment. So it might be 1 week, it might be 2 weeks, but it's basically a period of time, a time block where you're committing to get work done to try and ship work. And so, that's kind of how you're getting to a point where you're taking product backlog. Here's all this stuff I need to get done. You're putting it into a sprint plan. You're saying, all right, next 2 weeks, next week, whatever you decide on, this is the work I'm going to ship. This is what I'm going to get done.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and just to clarify, I think you defined sprint super well as like a time boxed period of time that you're setting up the tasks that are closest to the fire. So that might be, I need to write the last 3 songs for my record to be written, and I need to, take the currently written ones into the demo phase or something like that. Just to give some context, internally at Indepreneur, we work on like a 2-week sprint phase. So a sprint, it lasts 2 weeks. That's how we plan the things that we need to plan out. At the IndieX agency, when we work with artists there, we have weekly sprints. So we're sprinting on certain things week to week. So that can vary just based on, one, how much time you want to set aside for a sprint and how chunky you want to make those sprints. It also kind of depends on the amount of people that are on your team, or if you have smaller teams within your band or within your artist project. Maybe your management team is working on a specific set of initiatives, and you've got your production team working on mostly studio stuff. That can all sort of weigh in on the length of your sprint, but it's not something to get too hung up about.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, sprint length will change. Like you said, it's really whatever makes sense for you and your organization or the team that you're working with. Circa and I meet every Saturday. So we're doing 1 week sprints. That's for our music, our music stuff. And then Indepreneur, as you said, we do 2 weeks. So I would say traditionally 2 weeks is what people do for sprint, but it's really whatever works for you and how you're able to kind of clear the work and get stuff done.
Yeah, for sure. So I'd be curious, just, apart from the album, like I want to release an album example, I'd be curious to know, folks might be hearing this right now and being like, oh my gosh, this is a lot to conceptualize. What are some other potential product goals, and how could those be broken down into sprint goals for artists? Totally. I can think of it, the agency, for example, how in a marketing campaign, some sprint tasks like a sprint goal, for example, might be an album launch campaign. We're at the phase where an artist has a record delivered and they have a whole bunch of or some content prepared for it. And some of the tasks that might go into the backlog for them that we're working on at the agency and working with their teams are, gathering their content, for example, starting to build website assets, landing pages, opt-in pages, writing copy, things like email copy, building out advertising campaigns, things like product ideation and offer ideation, working to create what a sales offer might look like. All of those sorts of things are the types of projects and tasks that might go into an artist product backlog specifically for marketing related things. And that's something that we then, lock in sprint planning, and we build out, what the next week is going to look like, what the following week is going to look like, so on and so forth. And then we move on things. But in your opinion, Jonah, what are some other things that you've seen, even with working with some of the best year ever folks?
Yeah, totally. And so, the album launch is certainly like, that would be a hefty product goal, right? And especially if you've taken the album launch training, there's a lot that goes into that. But yeah, certainly, Scrum and product goals could be broken down to much smaller and granular things. And so other examples, at least for myself, right? Like my current product goal for DUX is to just simply to get better at creating and marketing intro and education content. So again, using the buddy system, even though I've been releasing music as DUX for a long time, I'm still pretty early on in my buddy system journey to where I'm really trying to focus on intro and education content and doing that consistently. And that's something that I think Scrum is really helping me to do. Like I said earlier, I've made so much more progress on that having this system. So that could be a great example for me. Yeah. I populate my product backlog based on, okay, here's what I need to do to get to that point of being able to create and market intro and education content. So a lot of the people in Best Year Ever had similar kinds of product goals. It doesn't need to be this huge lofty thing. I mean, it certainly can be, right? Like if your goal is to, go play Coachella or whatever it is, that's up to you as a product owner. You know what your music business needs. And that's something I really love about Scrum. And before I give a couple other examples, just a good point to make with product goals is a product goal can be technically abandoned or changed at any time. You can only have one product goal at a time. So it's like, this is our singular focus in the sense that this is what we're working towards. But if you decide that, hey, this isn't what's in the best interest of the organization, this isn't what's in the best interest of the team, you can always pivot. You can abandon your product goal, which of course you would like to see it completed. But if you realize that you need to do other things, and that's something that just happened for me. Another example of a good product goal might be you want to do a certain number of single releases, or you want to release, a certain number of videos, different things like that. That's what I was focusing on for the first part of the year. And I released, 4 singles, the next one's coming out next month. But I realized that might not be the best bet for what I need with my artistry right now. And so I'm going to pivot. I'm going to repopulate my backlog to accommodate really what I think is more important. And that's after talking to people on the team and Indepreneur. That I've been getting into more of the trainings, and it's like, hey, you know what? I think I need to pivot here, but Scrum's going to let me do that. And so that's something that I really love about it. That I think no matter what your product goal is, there's an easy way to get there.
I think that's a really interesting point that you make that a lot of artists can learn from, because when you're doing all of the things, it can become really easy to sort of not have a singular focus in your business.
Yep.
And, good businesses of all kinds just don't run that way.
Yep.
For example, a coffee shop isn't breaking ground on being a coffee shop while also thinking about how to expand into becoming a convenience store.
Exactly.
Those two things don't coexist.
Right.
They can't coexist at the same time. There's just not enough resources.
Yep.
And I think that's something that creatives often struggle with. We have a lot of ideas,
Yep.
a lot of stuff that we want to do. So as far as like where to start off with with a system like this is trying to identify like, where do I want to go? What
Yep.
do I want to be focusing on? And is that in the best interest of what I should be doing right now? And then you can kind of set that as your product goal, so to speak, and then start to, plan out exactly what it is goes into allowing you to hit that goal. Does that sound like reasonable as like a starting point?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think because again, with Scrum and I know without getting too deep in the weeds of there's a lot of terminology in Scrum and it can definitely be overwhelming, but it was started. I mean, it's used predominantly, I would say, by developers, engineers, software developers. Yeah. And so you look at that kind of stuff. And I mean, as we're going through and building the new website for Indepreneur, there's so much that goes into that stuff and not my area of expertise at all, but just doing it here with our team as we're working with our developers to get the new website up. There's just so much that goes into it. And so, yeah, the product goal is just a great place to start. And like I said, Scrum is designed to be flexible. It's designed to have room to shift and change based on the needs. And so really it's up to your feelings as the product owner. And again, if you're in a band or you have collaborators, you might come up with your product goal together. I know for me personally, I've leaned on the team at Indepreneur a lot. I've talked with you, Jack, about this. I've talked with Circa and Ed and Jesse, and just trying to kind of feel people out and get a sense of, hey, what makes sense maybe for me to look at with improving in this area of my business, which for me is like marketing and being consistent with that and getting more comfortable with it. So your product goal might change and that's fine. And you can set it to be the biggest thing you want or something smaller that's just really what it's just supposed to be is that singular, hey, this is our focus. This is where we're working towards. Yeah,
for sure. I kind of think that it allows you to protect yourself a little bit from like shiny object syndrome too. Yep. You can sort of evaluate the things that you're seeing and you're hearing about, whether it's music industry news or, some random tactic that you saw online. Yep. You can sort of identify like, does this really fit into like what I'm focusing on right now? Or is this just a distraction?
Oh, yeah.
I think that leads me into like an interesting point on this that a lot of people might be wondering at this point is like, in a system like this, moving away from, sort of haphazard project planning or, and just allowing things to shift around sort of in a chaos. How do you recommend, for people to figure out how much time they actually have to get things done and then estimate their work, the things that they need to be doing based on that? Because like you said, plenty of artists are not full-time in their music businesses. They might be working other jobs. They might have other revenue streams related to music.
Yep.
A lot of people produce and then they do their artist thing as well.
Yep.
I think that's often a hang up is like, where do I find the time in the day? And this is getting back to kind of how we opened the episode, saying that like, this isn't a system that's meant to put you into like a hustle and grit mentality. It's supposed to be, systematic and smart.
Yep.
And sustainable.
Absolutely. And yeah, so two things to touch on from what you said that I think were really on point. So you mentioned the shiny object syndrome, and that's one thing that I personally, really love with Scrum is, and this will lead into the question you asked, just kind of with planning, but with the shiny object stuff, it's what I love about Scrum is when I'm doing my work, there is a lot of planning that goes into Scrum. So it does require a certain degree of taking time. It might be an hour, it might be 2 hours for us at Indepreneur. Sometimes it's 3 hours, but we do it every 2 weeks, beginning of a sprint plan. But there is a fair amount of time that you want to spend thinking about this stuff and giving yourself the opportunity to do that. And what I love about it is when I'm working on something, doing what I need to do for my DUX stuff, I'm working on my tasks for my sprint. When other things do pop up, you get that, kind of anxiety, like, oh man, I should be working on this. And what about this thing? It's much easier for me to ignore that and say, nope, you know what? Like, I've planned this out. I know that I'm where I need to be. I have this goal. You know what I mean? Like it's much easier to stay on task because you know that you've put the time in to be aware of the work that you're trying to do and like what goes into that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Totally. I think that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah. And then
just as a follow.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, and to your question, what you asked about, how does that tie in with sprint planning, right? I pulled off to go talk about your shiny objects. I thought that was such a good point, and I forgot your original question now.
My question was about like figuring out how much time you have to get things done and estimating you know, what you can reasonably take on.
Yep. So that was a big thing. Again, you know, when Circa and I really started to kind of ideate on what this kind of Scrum for Artists framework could look like, that was a big thing, because with Indepreneur, for the most part, for example, and I would say most companies that might adopt Scrum, most people are going to have a 40-hour work week, right? And so you kind of know, all right, here's the time I have. I have my 9 to 5, my 7 to 3, whatever your hours are. You kind of know when you're going to be doing the work, and so it's easier to account for that. It's a little trickier as an artist because, again, for an independent artist, especially, you know, if you are working a job, a full-time job, part-time job, you have family commitments, you know, whatever the case may be. We all know like things can just go off the rails real quick, and so. I would say that the mechanism by which we try and alleviate some of that is really by doing as much scheduling as we can and estimating time for tasks that need to happen. And so that's something that Circa and I started doing pretty early on when we adopted and started to kind of build this workflow, Scrum for Artists, is to say, okay, how much time a week do I have, right? And so what we did is we went in and we said, okay, well, we've got family time. You know, he wants to spend time with his wife. I want to spend time with my girlfriend. You know, we want to see our families. We, you know, have to work out or do some exercise and go grocery shopping, you know, whatever needs to happen, the things that, you know, hey, this time is spoken for. I got to sleep 7 hours a night, 8 hours a night, whatever you need. You kind of block those things off, because those we know, okay, these are the gotta habits. These are the things that need to get done for my life. And then you kind of look at it week to week and say, all right, how much time am I left over with at this point? And look, I mean, for some people that might be 2 hours a week. For some people, it might be 20 hours a week or 40 hours a week. But just kind of trying to get a sense of, all right, realistically, how much time a week do I have to put towards stuff? And then what you want to do with your tasks for your sprint is to go in and say, all right, how long are these kinds of things going to take? Now, that could be a little tricky to establish at first. For me, at least, I said, oh, you know, I can write a new song in 4 hours, and it's like, it doesn't really work like that. It's not the same. It's not the same as editing a video or writing some copy, right? It's like you know, this is artistry, and there's a lot of flux with it. There's emotion and all these inspiration, whatever. So, but you want to try and get close, and you want to try and say, all right, assuming that editing this video or running this ad campaign is going to take me X amount of time, I want to try to establish those time estimates so that I can really look at my sprint and say, all right, I know I have 20 hours available. Here's where that time is going to go. And this is roughly what I think these tasks, you know, might take. And do I have enough time to do them?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and that's a great way to look at it. I know that, like, you know, as creatives, we tend to, you know, sometimes maybe get goosebumps or shrivel up when it comes to the idea of like putting our creativity into like time window boxes, especially when it comes to things like writing or recording and stuff like that.
Yep.
But it is really important to do, because otherwise stuff just gets ahead of you and it gets away from you. So even if it's down to just like, you know, I have X amount of time to allot to, you know, writing this song this week. Then at the very least, it allows you to move and get something done. And another interesting point that I think comes out of this is like, I kind of have a mantra that I've adopted over the past few years when it comes to, you know, just being an artist in general is, you know, a lot of people love like a DIY ethic, a do-it-yourself sort of ethic. And, you know, I love that. I come from music scenes that very much approach a lot of what they do with that. But I've always sort of intuitively felt that, you know, DIY doesn't mean do it alone. And so when you start to break out your work in a system like this and actually start really doing planning, you can start to see like, okay, shoot, you know, I do probably need to look into bringing on team members.
Yep.
And, that might be like, okay, I need to find somebody who's going to be like, an audio engineer collaborator, or I need to find a graphic designer and pay them, what they're worth, so that I'm not spending my time doing something that I'm not really that great at, or that takes me too long. I think that's where, as a business, you start to learn where your core competencies are as a person, especially if you're a solo artist. I think this is particularly important, but it goes for bands too. Yep. It allows you to see like where your band members or other people on your team sort of fit into the stuff that you need to get done.
Yep.
And it allows you to also see, what are the gaps that I need to fill? When I'm looking to build a team, if I'm looking to build a team, where do people fit into that? It's not just random and chaotic again.
Yep. Yeah, man. And it's so funny you bring that up because, again, Cirque and I had talks about this over the last couple months. I would say that, and I'm probably about as far extreme on the side of doing everything yourself from the musical standpoint as you can get. And by that, I just mean I write almost all of the music I'm releasing. I mix it, I produce it, I mix it. I usually am just doing the mastering. I'm usually editing videos or maybe throwing it to Michael here at Indepreneur. Yeah. But, I'm pretty far to that extreme, I would say. Maybe, as it compares to, like you said, a band. And it's interesting because Circa he also has all the knowledge to do a lot of it himself, but he's working with some collaborators. He's got a producer in Iggy that he works with, and Chris Cannon, a co-writer and a collaborator. He's got a mix engineer who's out in LA. He's got me, and I work on music with him. And so, I for me, because I'm so far to that extreme example, I've talked a lot with Cirque about this and some friends. It is very important, I think, that you do integrate your collaborators, your team members into this process. And like how far that goes really depends on how comfortable your collaborators are. So, for example, when Cirque brought Scrum and this idea to the guys he works with, they were really excited about it, and they were like, awesome. Yeah. And they're in Asana now as well, and they have access to the board and they know what's going on. My collaborators were less inclined to want to do that, but I didn't really need them to be, right. Like I realized, hey, I need to get some more people involved. I need to take some of the pressure off of me to do all of this. And so, getting those people going and having them come in, it doesn't need to be super rigid or anything, but just for you to kind of understand, like you said, hey, these people are going to help me do this. I don't need to do everything myself. I can break out work and communicate that to these people so that they can help me and the band or whatever the project get to where it's trying to go, That's
such a good point, because it is something that I think a lot of artists might run into, when it comes to bringing in their collaborators. It's like, oh, you're not going to get, so-and-so to fall into a system. And, I get that for sure. Especially like they're not your employee. They're likely just a collaborator. Sometimes they're just your friends that are wanting to work with you on stuff because they think it's cool. And so getting them to commit to like a big system-wide change is hard.
Yeah.
But, the principles of like doing all of this and, starting to think about your work in this sort of way does allow you to, plan for what needs to be done by other people regardless.
Yep.
So I do think that's a really good point to make. I also think it's interesting. We've seen a lot of our artists at IndieX, a lot of the clients that we work with, both currently and past clients, who have taken some of the processes that we use at the agency when it comes to sprint planning and, really, sort of structurally setting goals and attaching tasks to those goals. They've taken that and run with it on their own as well. We've got a number of artists who I've seen their Asana boards that they have outside of, the agency board, which is hilarious and amazing. Like it's always super inspiring to see.
Yep.
Even on some of the demo calls that I'll have with our clients, every week, they'll be like, oh yeah, like we can definitely deliver that content to you. Like, let me just add it to like, our team's Asana board.
Yep.
And we'll make sure that we get it done this week for you guys.
Yeah.
So that kind of thing, like it is really cool. Like as you start to do this, there's almost like an attraction to process that I think starts to happen. Even if it's not fully implemented or realized, it definitely does. It does kind of rub off, which is cool.
Yeah. And look, I mean, you touched on this earlier, and I think this is something we ran into with the best year ever. When we ran that, I do think there was, a pretty non-zero amount of resistance to. It can seem like a lot, okay? Like Scrum can seem like a lot, but in general, this is all a lot, and we've already established that. We're well aware of it. And so, to understand with Scrum and kind of going into it with your eyes open to say, look, this stuff takes time. I mean, I started, Indepreneur, as my employer was paying me to learn Scrum, right? We wanted to implement that company wide. So I took 3 or 4 months and did a lot of research, learned about it, read the Scrum guide, was in forums, talking to friends. And so, to pick this up as an artist without any prior knowledge of it, and maybe not having 3 to 4 months to research it and understand it, it can definitely be intimidating. But again, I think going into it with your eyes open and understanding just the basic principles is really important, and I think can really help alleviate some of that pressure and stress, so that you're not it doesn't seem so daunting when you walk into it,
Yeah, for sure. And I think just sort of like right off the bat here, when you start to think about this, if it seems overwhelming, I think, coming up with a product goal I think it kind of, it will come naturally, I think, to a lot of creatives, because they think about like the cool creative thing that they want to do next. And if you can just decide to set that as your goal for, an amount of time, then you've got a product goal. And then when it comes to things like, what do I actually need to work on to make that a reality? I think a good way to think about this, and this is, a big part of a lot of the planning that we do internally and with our clients, and with our clients at IndieX. And, also just to give context real quick, when Jonah and I talk about best year ever, we were talking about a workshop series that we kind of implemented with a number of folks in our community. It started at the beginning of the year. It was a workshop series on how to make 2021 the best year ever. And we talked about a lot of these and worked through a lot of these planning structures with Scrum, and got to watch a lot of people implement that. I wanted to just give that context real quick in case we didn't.
Yeah.
So that's what best year ever was. So, a lot of this, what we talk about is the idea of like, how can I, based on my goal, how can I add value and move towards that goal in, a given sprint, whether that's a week, 2 weeks, whatever it might be. So, if value for you is, I know I need to get, I don't know, let's just take a silly example here. Like, let's say your product goal is that you want to be releasing, you want to be building up your audience on a channel like YouTube. You want to build up your YouTube audience, and that's your product goal, let's say. And in order to do that you need to be releasing content regularly. So maybe, added value in a given sprint is like, I want to have one cover video done. I'm oversimplifying all of this super heavily, but just to give the context of like what we mean by adding value. And we touched on this in a couple episodes ago where we talked about, minimum viable product and what that means to your music business in a number of contexts. That's a lot of what we focus on with systems like this. Done is really better than perfect in a lot of ways. And we'll move you towards what you need to, where you need to be going. Yeah.
And I think, like you kind of are touching on with MVP, minimum viable. And I think, again, Scrum is great at kind of accounting for this and to dive in a little bit more again into the terminology. So in a sprint, as you kind of touched on earlier, you do have a sprint goal, which is essentially going to be, hey, if all else fails, this is what I'm looking to ship. This is what I'm looking to do in this sprint. But you do also have additional distinctions that you can make, which are called increments. And so increments might be really anything that's going to be shipped as a finished processes, or maybe it's another step towards the product goal. It's something definitive that's going to be done. You also will define those. And so to illustrate that, in terms of how I use this, and Indepreneur uses this, and with Cirque. So we meet every Saturday, me and Kyle, and now Andy is joining us as well. Ed's going to pop on this weekend. So we got everyone from Indepreneur team coming to our meetings on Saturday. But, a lot of times we'll have there's your sprint goal, and then you might have 4 or 5 different increments, which are, again, additional work that you're trying to ship that's making progress towards your product goal. Now, my last sprint, for example, I was gone for half of it. I was in LA. I was busy. I had a show. I had rehearsal. And so I didn't really go into sprint planning, even being too concerned about that. I'm just trying to outline the work that needs to get done, but I'm keeping eyes on the most important stuff. The things that I feel like, hey, again, as product owner, this is my music business. What needs to ship? What's most important? And so you might walk in to review your sprint and say, oh man, I missed 3 of these increments. I didn't get all this stuff done. But if you can walk away with one thing positive and you stayed on track with that, then that's still a win, right? Like, as you said, done better than perfect.
Right.
So just as long as you're shipping something that's working you towards that goal, we're not going to worry too much about, oh man, it didn't get done this week or it's okay. Life happens. You still have your product goal. You still know what it is, and you're still going to keep sprinting on it next time,
For sure. Yeah. So I kind of want to just close with, because we unpacked a whole lot of stuff here.
Yeah.
And my hope with this episode was to help indies think about, how can I put processes into my music business.
Yeah.
Whether like I said, whether you're a solo artist, a band, something in between. My hope here is that we can kind of go from the idea of like, oh, I need to do all of the things, especially like all of the things that we talk about on this podcast so much when it comes to marketing, and I don't know where to fit them into my life, into just thinking about like, okay, I can have a system for planning my work, planning my work at a very high level, planning my work at a medium level, and what I need to be getting done right away, what I need to be getting done, after that, and so on and so forth, and
Yep.
what I need to be getting done today. For people who might be hearing this, and I'm sure there's plenty of people that are like, oh man, I'm just not like process oriented. If this sounds really, really hard, where would you recommend as a starting point, Jonah, from like, implementation, beta version?
Yeah. So I would say, honestly, step 1 is probably to check out the Scrum guide, which we talked about. We should, we can link it because it's a really easy to understand document. And honestly, like when you look at it, one thing I think about Scrum, and you hear Scrum is kind of like a corporate buzzword in some respects, right? Like, it's like, you're running Scrum, and Agile is another one you'll hear a lot. And a lot of it comes from these developer communities. But, walking into that stuff can certainly feel really intimidating. And what I love about the Scrum guide, it's a PDF. It's like 10 pages. It's not a 200-page manual with all these things. It's very bare bones. A lot of things that companies do that even with us with Indepreneur are kind of hybrids from other workflows. Maybe you're pulling in some stuff from Agile, which is a similar but separate process. So looking at the Scrum guide and just understanding from a bird's eye, okay, here's what needs to happen with this. And then for someone that might be feeling that way, I'm not super process oriented, I'm not really either. And I would encourage people to dip your toes into that pool and just see how it goes, see how it feels. Don't put a ton of pressure on it. Just commit to something small, and start to get a feel for it and see how you like it. Because again, for me, I've been doing the DUX project for years, and a lot of that was just, I did a lot of work, I got a lot of stuff done, but I didn't really have any rhyme or reason to it. And so, allowing yourself to like get comfortable in that, and don't expect that right away you're going to move mountains. Again, we've just kind of hit our stride with this, and we started learning about Scrum a year ago, and I would say just now, and it's constantly improving. We have setbacks, and we have, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So just, check out the Scrum guide and don't be too intimidated, because it is a very flexible system that can seem very complicated at first, but once you start to use it, you're like, okay, I see where this is going. Like, I see how this could be really beneficial for what I'm trying to do,
I think that's great advice for sure. I think like then taking that and, this is just coming to my mind is like for people who might, do that and then, check out the Scrum Guide and then not really know what to do with it. What I would recommend from like a very, very bare bones level is with the understanding that you have, commit yourself to just, doing 90 days of trying to run your music business in a more structured way.
Yeah.
Give yourself 3 months time. Make your product goal the thing that you're most excited about doing or the thing that's most on track right now. Because obviously, like, you're probably not starting from ground zero unless you're like, just starting a new artist project or something. You might already have a record in process. So make that your product goal. Set the thing that you're most excited about or the thing that you're currently working on as your product goal. And then just start to plan out exactly what's going to be getting done. Put that into your backlog. Backlog is really just a fancy word for to-do list.
Yeah.
And then you can start to look at it and say, like, what is the highest priority on here?
Yep.
Break that into your sprints, whether they be a week, 2 weeks, a month, whatever they might be.
Yep.
I think I personally would recommend like a 1 to 2 week sprint. I think that's like comfortably manageable and doesn't allow you to get ahead of yourself.
Yep.
And then just start trying to manage your work that way. I've seen this implemented in, certainly tons of artist businesses at this point through the work that we do at IndieX. Obviously, the workflow that we use internally here at Indepreneur has been working really well for us as well. I've also seen this implemented into other businesses. And, it can really help you to stay on target and stay focused and, not lose your mind with a to-do list that exists just on your phone or on a piece of paper or the back of a napkin.
Yeah. And that's a good point, Jack, because I think another thing to point out is, again, Scrum is kind of a buzzword workflow right now, but the one of the positives from that is there's a lot of resources that are available. There's a lot of good stuff that you can check out and see how different people and different companies are using it. I think that can be really eye-opening as well, Yeah,
for sure. That's totally spot on. Yeah. Well, this was a blast, man.
Yeah.
I hope that people get inspired by this and hopefully take some time to think about this sort of stuff. We're moving into August of 2021. We'll be in August by the time that this episode airs.
Yeah.
And there's lots of time to get a lot of stuff done if you just put down some focus. And so hopefully this just inspires you guys to take some of the maybe overwhelming things that we talk about, that you should be focusing on and figuring out like, okay, how can I actually focus on them?
Yep.
Given all the other stuff that you have going on in your life.
Yeah, man. And again, not to just keep singing the praises of Scrum, but, as kind of a final thought, I think that the biggest thing for me, and I don't want to give anyone the impression that myself or Circa or anyone in Best Year Ever or even Indepreneur, none of these examples are run flawlessly, right? Like there's a lot of
oh my gosh, no.
There's a lot of trial and error. There's a lot of stuff that gets missed. But the thing that I really like, and I know this is something we talk about a lot on the podcast and just in general as an independent artist, any artist. If I look week to week, like I said, I might miss some work and I might get discouraged about that. Life came up. I was not feeling well, whatever. I missed the thing. But rather than beating myself up or getting down about that, when I look at it in that under the magnifying glass, it's like, oh man, I took a dip down here, but when I zoom out and I look at the year, I look at, we're 8 months into 2021 and what have I accomplished, and I zoom out even further, I just have that upward trajectory. I think Cirque and a lot of the people in Best Year Ever and Indepreneur, it's like when you look at it in the bird's eye view, you see that upward growth because you're making small incremental progress and it might waver week to week and you're up and down, but you're able to commit to doing work. And even if you ship one thing, that's progress, right? Like you're growing, you're doing what you need to do. So, I think that's important to keep in mind is just focusing on the bigger picture and, hey, if you mess up this week, that's okay. Get back on the horse and try it again next week kind of thing,
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point.
Yeah.
No business system is implemented perfectly,
right?
Especially at the first point.
Yep.
So yeah, that's such a good point to make, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I hope you guys dug this episode as a little bit of an intro into the processes that we use here at Indepreneur and at IndieX. I hope it gets you guys feeling a little bit inspired. Maybe you've got those people in your band that you're like, oh man, like I wish that they could do more. I wish that I didn't have everything all on my back. I know that that's something that I've certainly felt as a frontman in the past. Like, oh, I'm the guy that's doing all the things and kind of just carrying everybody with me. Building these kind of systems into your business can be a really, really great way to share the love a little bit, move towards things that everybody feels really, really passionate about, and really just get more done in your music business. So I hope you guys take some of this stuff that you learned from DUX here today and check out some of the resources that we share in the show notes. And I will catch you guys on the next episode of Creative Juice. We'll see you then. Peace out, Indies.